Hello, there were some retired police chiefs from Wethersfield. Have the intimate ties and their lawyers. And there's a lawyer of a former director of the FBI, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, and his co-defendants and their family members and neighbors, and people involved with Washington, D.C., and with the World Trade Center in New York, involved also with Connecticut campuses, including all sides of criminal and civil cases, and courts putting sequence shifts and collusion/s at the same time with predicate acts, and with the news at the same time, like WFSB did when I recorded them forcing a child abuser with police forms and courts family members too, their kids too, and people and ones intercities. Like there's a teacher named O'Neill from West Hartford involved with the Sandy Hook camp prison there, and with whiting forensics people involved with wire and mail crimes, with sexual and medical offenders of kids, identity theft, fraud, slander, and people with the Saudi attackers, with some Mendez police from Wethersfield involved with fake conversation with me at the police station. Never had a word of conversation with the older Mendez police brother. I didn't speak with any other police there that day. Increasingly, Wethersfield police have collusions with these Mendez police, with others next to Fox Connecticut News in Hartford, too, and with New Britain Superior Court in the hallway of the court, for example, too. Involved with them with predicate acts with sexual and medical offenders of kids, identity theft, fraud, slanders, and way worse. And the news at the same time put me in fake conversations with themselves and with others, and they hid what brought up their campus to me, which was stuff intercities recorded too on Facebook. These are people on Facebook hiding what's actually recorded. Even how all sides of criminal and civil cases and the courts and the police forms and people speaking about stuff have collusions at the same time. Same reason, same thing that witch trials place. There's a witch trials place in Old Wethersfield, Connecticut, right next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Still, other told than our founders declassified to have communicated with those places. James Madison's plan. They had to counter extort George Washington too. And he helped them with that plan, helped them counter extort people at key locations to force people to have no choice, but to counter only to an extent. That torture, extortion, faction nature, slavery against everyone, rolls against themselves or sense. Because there was a method. Had all the internationally monitored conversations too. Used to sense all collusions with that. Torture against their own country's names. Liberation of their own country's names against the people of their names. Either one. The difference of that too exploited where fact nature appreciation was and is supposed to be unabridged. In other words, our founders' communications are replaced in our faces. So Fox News has people with Russia and Ukraine from Central Connecticut State University with foreign and domestic military associated with General Keane, with worse than criminal incompetence because he came through campuses A through Z, replacing what our founders communicated, declassified. They're supposed to have clearer than day how and why our founders wanted nothing to do with slavery. All exceptions is because there was a breaching method that sensed anyone trying to counter that. They would hurt them and everyone else next to them. And because it had not, it wasn't just about that sick thing, everyone against themselves. It was a bunch of everything, everyone against themselves in ways they didn't want. But the breaching method made the exceptions. And made sustained roles with it. That's why we never addressed how sickly, non-distinctly, the North and the South had roles with slavery. Those countries, to themselves, tortured, extorted, vaccinated, enslaved, therefore physically. The names of the people of science is abridged. from difference where and how we are different than other species bodies. We are distinct but non-distinct and simultaneous, per that which is hyper simultaneous too, but that which is not us nor them, but is all things anyway. And so we could discern it. The other species bodies are also individual species bodies distinct from each other. Individual species bodies of a whole bunch of individual bodies with all group differences, generating itself for our discernment. We have this obfuscated in that self-value, and that being used remotely. The syntax of it, the nature of it, people A through Z. Not one person defended our founders correctly, let alone our presidents. I mean, not one defended our presidents correctly, let alone our founders. Our founders, plural, directed us to understand them as those people behind James Madison and his plan. And that was to counter, extort, and force the other founders to become a unity, even though that unity would still have to stay. Fact, human nature, tortured, extorted, and enslaved, therefore physically, and forced to be roles, otherwise to be sensed, including if it was a majority of people that didn't want to have roles, and that would be sensed, and it would be adapted to, including it was everyone. A breaching method forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded the people operating names A through Z of countries, the locations, areas, and states, to counter impositions of hyper foreign, hyper criminal enterprise, so to speak. I'm not a lawyer. Lawyers on all sides of cases, and one's not even involved with the cases. You just call them up and say a couple of words, they'll change fake what you said. And the police forms have roles with just faking phone conversations. Not one identity of the law had integrity here. Because all exception nature too was used to deny. They had collusion with all nature of crime scenes. The suburbs are a crime scene. There was slavery entrenched in the crime scene, north and south, starting with the suburbs, where you guys still have other communicate for James Madison than he communicated. In other words, because you came through campuses A through Z, and the differences of them. The best one or the worst one, where you appreciate that. This preaching method keeps you measured and maintained. Each age of human nature. You have principles communicated to you other than how they should have been spoken about. Black pupils, whites of eyes. We have the same color eyes, different color eyes at the same time. That's one of the qualities, aspects of nature the different species bodies have. Distinctly, non-distinctly, simultaneously. But again, for that further distinct identity of simultaneous nature, where it is a scientific value that comes with its complete identity relation to itself. And the only increasing value of that here, or it is forced from here, and where and how a special, but a special difference, appreciation of a special difference is necessary to the discernment of this. Just like taking trigonometry is necessary to the discernment of a trigonomic equation. But don't forget and understand that how the identity of reason, the identity of the sciences share, is simultaneously greater than and more finite than math. It appreciates lists in ways that computers could not and cannot. In other words, all exception nature show the same. See, there is this one identity of volume distinct from all others, while not. In other words, so in other words, I forgot what I entitled this video. Oh yeah, but in other words, please, the military, get me off of fake conversations with Channel 3 News. A bunch of people with Channel 3 News have rules with the World Trade Center attack. And the World Trade Center has rules with mixed natures of organized crimes, manifest at locations, areas, and states, intercities and intercampuses and intra, and the differences of that, all ages and natures of them. Fire and medical campuses. Harvard Hospital has rules with criminal enterprises, plural, and with private ones at the same time. And the differences of their guilt with that, the people tied to them, or the people with the businesses and houses next to them, like people with the name Mariano, per them, per the intelligence, still. In other words, and or the Morals Market and Iola's Kitchen. And tomorrow's market, where it was then and now, it's increasingly involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Lusky, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, recorded being and having been used remotely, countering criminal enterprises grouped wrong. All exceptions, exception nature come with demonstrations, slash S of the same thing. They have collusion at each age and nature of campus. In other words, sickly non-distinctly too, in the suburbs and in New York City. They even have families that had the high life progressions through time with that, with the intelligence family. They have rules with so many organized crime acts and methods that they just have to fake whole phone transcripts. In other words, I don't know who was on the line with Joe DeMoro called me. Then one time I recorded, and then he called back and was trying to pretend like we were talking, like we used to talk on the phone. These are trying to pretend fake things with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, involved with a bunch of people on Valley Crest Street, and with conjunctions to it and conjunctions to that, including as the state judicial branch officers, is increasingly roles with people involved next to them that brought my name up criminally for an influence, tactically delusions raw. People I don't know at all, and people that I only know that went tried to plant evidences next to the state judicial branch offices, and with their roles with sexual and medical offenders of kids on Facebook too recorded. Facebook has roles with New Britain Superior Court, with Marines, people with the Air Force, people with the Navy, people with the Coast Guard, involved at the same time with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and people with their teachers putting fake things in databases. Also, a Mr. Neville, and people tied to him, the name Neville on Facebook. Also, increasingly with mayors from Connecticut and from Wethersfield, and one tied to a roof next to the Department of Education in Wethersfield. Involved also with a bunch of people tied to a John Tomorrow, and people involved with the security of the campuses, in the medical. They're putting predicate acts with facts in databases. They're also having this done for them, and just keeping the insidiousness natures who will hide things in details and natures of organized crimes mixed, and uses of the differences of them. A Leahy family faked conversations with me. Harvard Hospital has rules with Russians and Americans, with all kinds of acts and natures of methods of organized crimes, and with the people with the World Trade Center attack, and Central Connecticut State University intelligence families. See, they make confessions when they're caught, like involved with wire crime acts and methods. A Violet family involved with intelligence families that used to live in my street with sequence shifts and seeking me out as a stranger, and then trying to make it look like I haven't even seen them with the O'Brien family, but they both have use of another way, and they have rules with a bunch of people all along Route 175 from the founding locations. Are people that recorded sought me out that were influenced by investigators that are increasingly involved. I'm planting evidence on all sides of my house that's recorded, and on the sides of theirs, conjunctions to that. They even have rules of home break-ins in the area through time, and more recently. I don't know all the names involved. See, people want to get into conflict, other people's business dishonestly, and just in other words, or in other words, they want in other words get them on paper, one name and sequence into branch. So I don't have to because they want us to have people pretend other anyway, and then just who's hierarchy. That's even they were reading the statutes on YouTube on a YouTube channel. We'll go into this, but in other words, get me off the fake conversations with Channel 3 News about the World Trade Center attack. That was also their timed collusions with sources of WTNH and with people next to Fox Connecticut News involved with World Trade Center predicate acts before and after it through other methods and natures of organized crimes predicate acts with facts like faked phone transcripts, faked conversations and ties to kids and adults as police, putting fake transcripts in databases, using that information to keep all natures of investigations investigators, use remotely, criminally, foreign influence, tactical collusions, raw collusion/s, also to hide the collusion singular that everyone's rolls with, where and how everyone still has roles, using American history and our founders' words, leaving out what they declassified about, leaving it, forcing other people to, including what nature itself communicates to us about that. Black people's pain. Please, General Keane, please follow mandatory law with Judge Napolitano too. I've been asking, get me off the fake conversations with them. A whole bunch of people with the FBI director involved with the families of and the intimate ties of and the kids of the Britain Superior Court and Hartford courts involved with foreign and domestic military at West Hartford locations and the campuses intercities before the World Trade Center attack. And since to hide it, they have an officer Hunter, or that's who they say his name is. They're playing games with the Hartford courts with the FBI and the people with the Dean Judd and his kid, also involved with the FBI and the courts and the confessions request to help by Eric Burgess. And I wasn't clear. I'm going to tell him what I was going to do about that. I didn't even have to look at. I didn't even know it was his name yet. Robert Luskin, former standing chairperson on Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, involved with predicate acts methods between the campuses with other countries, though, too. See, they are manifest that way there, too. Central Connecticut State University has these people also involved with Detective Samuda with some black KKK Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, and people involved with some wire crimes and some sexually themed with that, with the business office with them, and with the FBI director playing games with the courts names too, and with the ones involved tied to her, that girl, from ones from Wethersfield. And she was walking right by her in the library of Central Connecticut State University years ago. One of the ones with the name Hanson, Heather Hanson. And there were she has a bunch of people involved with wire crimes of the police, falsified police reports, identity, fraud, slanders, and their educators are involved too. I never had a class with a Heather Hanson. They tried to make a fake exception by putting me in a middle school class. That teacher and his family has roles all along Route 3 with all kinds of natures of organized crime, evidences, rackets, identity theft, fraud, slander. His roles with Vermont intelligence families involve criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, interstates, black people. The suburbs were designed before America's founders were born for torture, extortions, human nature, slavery method. This is before cars, and they're still manifest. You guys want to debate? You guys think that it's debatable that even then the suburban / urban cities and the urban, not one of them is not tactically denatured. Even the rural, even the Native Americans, they don't have enough. They don't have like the access to water and the might of the whole species body of even in other words, because we're all through systems tactical terror from that, which is hyper native pure. It shows us the difference of hyper between president and chief is its difference. where it is all things. It's like to the parts of your body individually grouped together. You're different. You're difference of your complete identity. It's right where and how you are its system here. Our value is force from here. As force, space, nature, transfer. As leaf of Hades. Lethe. Leaf of Hades. More probably and demonstrably by the ancients, having been defined this way. See, but everyone had to rediscover the sciences. And while a breaching method knew that and keeping them rediscovered in layers, abridged, for collusion slash as with its abridgment that no one wants, except for right where and how everyone's systems, for example, that can't afford the finite details, can't afford the sequence truth, can't afford to fake and change what people say when they speak about predicate acts, using truths that are true always, even black people's white survives. We have the means to peer right through, which stands as guides, attend. In other words, we all agree about these things. We're just shock and awe. And this preaching method force everyone to blame other things. In other words,